Hi there, my name is SHAZZBARBARIC, and I'm running for Congress. Not only that, we're starting a revolution. How are we starting that revolution? Well, we're going to have many independents run for Congress and statewide office, and we are going to audit the news sources as they first probably try to ignore us, and then they're going to try to control the narrative, like they did with Occupy Wall Street. They'll claim maybe that we don't have leadership, or that we're unclear in our demands, or maybe they'll say that we're emotionally extremists, try to plant provocateurs within our ranks, or find the most extremist among us, and then put those people in the spotlight. But we've seen all of their dirty tricks before. History has a very clear record of what power does when you oppose it. What do we have on our side? We have the truth, first and foremost, so we're right. It takes more energy to oppose the truth than it does to merely speak it. So we should be the calmer, more rational, level-headed voices in the room. Also, when you have the truth, you'll have more peace. So we have the peace. Well, I said the other day, wisdom leads to peace, and peace leads to strength. So the truth that we hold and promote through wisdom, that war is costly and ineffective, and rational human beings should be able to come to peaceful accord if they're not trying to manipulate or take advantage of each other. So we have to disavow the empires that are trying to manipulate and take advantage of each other all over the world. Claim this moral high ground, which is the wisest path to progress as a society if we claim to be a civilization and not just a bunch of barbarians. And then out of this wisdom, we will have peace. And then we can promote this peace, and that should give us strength in order to achieve our aims. It's very simple. All of the wisdom traditions pretty much preach this. We'll take two examples, Zen Buddhism and Christianity. Love thy neighbor. Even when, when a man's ways please the Lord, even his enemies are at peace with him. That's in the Bible. And then the Tao speaks of peace. The best war is that in which the best victory is that in which not a single shot is fired. I just mangled that. But the best victory is that in which not a single shot is fired. That is Sun Tzu, actually, the art of war. So violence is costly. Conflict is costly. Being wise, peaceful, we should be able to figure this out. We are creating a movement to ground objective reality in these concepts. It's called Flash Politics, FP. It's also called the Friendship Party because most of the divisions, if not all of them in society, are artificial. You see, there's a blue gang called the Democrats, and there's a red gang called the Republicans. I call them gangs because they operate based off of power, intimidation, and loyalty. There are other gangs in inner cities who also operate on these same principles, but those were a reaction to their poverty and their predation, and actually them being ignored and left to fend for themselves. The same way that gangs operate in prison. It seems like gangs are the lowest form of social organization in order for people to defend against themselves. Really basic loyalty, usually based off of the color of your skin or blood. And so your brotherhood, based off your ancestry, or at least what you look like, is how you don't get beat up in prison. But also, that seems to be the pattern that our political factions are operating as. Loyalty and power, not ideals, not character. If we address that, and we break up the political gangs, I call this the after party. Welcome to the after party, not the party. Because the parties, everyone is invited to the party. You want to go to the after party. That's where the homies are at. After everyone comes to my house and we have a big old shindig. And then I get rid of everyone because you have to eventually say, all right, you guys, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. Who's left? The real homies, right? The day ones, the day zeros. And then you have the after party among the small group. And you kick back and you say, wow, that was a good time. And then you make your memories. That's one example. But this is the after party. It's going to be a closer collection of individuals. It's going to be based off of values and character. We're going to talk about character a lot. Talk about how to be a good human being and promote those values, not just power, not just loyalty. We're not going to villainize or continue to oppress poor people. We're not going to, I just spoke about gangs and people in the street. But if that's a reaction to poverty and desperate circumstances, perhaps if we lower the amount of desperate people, we'll lower the amount of bad choices that they're making. If we give people opportunity, perhaps they'll make better choices with their life. From my experience, most people want peace and want stability. And you only do desperate actions because you were put into desperate circumstances. Now, these gangs of political power in the United States, they have a lot of money. They're rich. There's no excuse for them to be operating like they do except for greed. So that's really where we should address our energy and focus, right? Is the people at the top who operate based off of greed and power and inhuman values. They prey off of suffering. They get the rest of us to fight each other while they continue to get rich. We know this is happening because they're dynastic. Their children, their family, they make sure that their power continues within their own blood, remember? Because that's how these primal social organizations work, based off of lineage, based off of who you are. So, remember, anyways, we won't get too much into it, but Trump's father was a real estate developer asshole, same as him. And Barack Obama's grandmother was a banker in Hawaii when it just became a state. Probably, and if you look into the history, it wasn't really just how Hawaii became a state. We colonized it like we colonized Puerto Rico. We allowed them to become a state. We haven't allowed Puerto Rico to become a state. But first, our economic interests, which are the interest of the private corporations who called on the United States government to come in and subjugate these people so we can make more profit. Now, Barack Obama's grandmother was one of those people who subjugated them financially. And then she also acted as a gateway to the other colonies we were trying to subjugate in the Philippines, where you have ties to the despotic regimes in our empire, where we were sending soldiers to die. And, well, no, by that time, we were just sending the intelligence, remember. We were having them kill themselves. The highest level of empire, you don't kill people. You have them kill themselves. You provide the intelligence and support and the training. There's it's not called the School of the Americas anymore. They changed the name because once you start catching up to the script, they start changing the words. So that way there's discontinued history. Because the worst thing you can happen is to have someone connect all of the oppression back into one larger narrative that's easy to digest. So you shift it around a little bit. You try to throw people off. Blackwater changes its name to She, and now it's changed its name a third time, I think, or a fourth. So you had the School of the Americas, which America, the United States, had to train dictators or mercenaries or genocidal groups, militias, and then send them out in the world. We did that to Latin America, and we did that in the Philippines. Now, Barack Obama, his family, his blood, how he is in the gang of power. His grandmother worked at a bank who had ties to the oppressive dictators in the Philippines, where they would launder money for them back and forth. Because that's the thing, we provide intelligence, but we also provide the money. I remember William Blum is a very good scholar on empire. He worked within, I forgot what administrations, but he's someone who worked within the government and then dedicated his life to exposing the American empire. You have a couple other, Chalmers Johnson. These people, he worked in the Reagan administration, Chalmers Johnson. These people who have firsthand account of empire, but also never stopped being a good human being, stopped being a moral person. And so usually they dedicate their life to try to expose this empire, but it's drops in the bucket compared to the propaganda that we digest on a daily basis, which I'm documenting here by reading the New York Times every single day. So William Blum, he said, someone asked him, how does the CIA do it? It's in one of my videos if you look at my work. How does the CIA do it? Overthrow a democracy, install a dictator. And William Blum says, the secret ingredient is money. They have a lot of it. Remember, the CIA's budget is unaccounted. It's a black budget. And on top of that, they've been implicated in narco trafficking. Yes, the CIA, who in our Marvel movies is always helping the good guy and promoting good. And James Bond, right? He's the CIA, but the British version, the MI6. But in real life, well, during our Vietnam War, they were drug smuggling. And the CIA had the second largest or the largest air fleet in the world at the time. So the most airplanes in the air at any given time. And they were filled with heroin. And so in the Golden Triangle, in Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, that area where we were sending young men to die, many of them were addicted to heroin while they were out there as well. We were also, our military intelligence, shipping it back to the United States. And then what did they do in the 90s? They did the same thing but with crack cocaine. They invented a crack cocaine boom in our inner cities. Again, and now you have the gangs at the top of the government talking to the gangs at the bottom of society. You don't think they influence each other? So there's a relationship here between members of the society and these predatory groups. And we're going to address the predatory groups at the very top, and those are the political gangs. The way that we're going to deal with the CIA and other predatory parts of the United States government is we are going to get ourselves into power, because that is our right, if you believe in democracy, that we should be able to elect people that are actually going to sort this all out, and then we're going to audit the government. So right now from the outside, we don't know how dirty it is. We don't know what game the Fed's playing. We don't know what game our intelligence agencies are playing. But it sure smells funny, right? It smells pretty bad. So we're going to go and we're going to open the books and figure out just what the heck is going on. We say we're going into the Middle East for what? To fight terrorism? Terrorism has increased since we've been in the Middle East. That's objective fact. Remember, we're grounding our politics in objective reality. They say that they're protecting us, and yet their actions are causing the harm that they claim to be protecting us from. That's the mafia's game 101, right? A protection racket. And then they use that in order to entrap us further. Well, you know what? If you don't let us keep playing this protection game, ISIS is going to keep growing. And then Iran is going to get a nuclear weapon. And now China. If you don't let us keep these perpetual wars, China is going to take over the world. Isn't that what we're trying to do? So what we're going to do, what our priority to do, is take back our country. And we're going to do that through the ballot box, because that's the peaceful means at our disposal. And it's still open. We're being manipulated through narratives. No one has a gun to my head, to your head. No one's stopping us from talking to each other and actually running independent candidates to take back our government. So that's what we're going to do. It's a very simple plan. It's going to take emotional maturity and calmness, because their biggest tool at their disposal is to make us emotionally unstable and fighting each other. What happened during 2020? We were in the streets fighting each other. And now you have Kyle Rittenhouse trial, where idiots got in the streets and started shooting at each other. They're turning society into a carnival circus of Jerry Springer-like freaks and geeks and sideshow tweaks. I don't know. They want us at our most emotionally unstable. So we can't sit down and figure out what's going on. It's a con man's game 101. Rile you up so you can't figure out the con. And what do our leaders do? They just rile us up even more. So if you want to support me, if you want to support the ideas I have and the movement that we're trying to create, give me money on Venmo. $1 might get you a sticker. $5 will definitely get you a sticker. I love doing that. Spread the word. I've been broke for the last 4 years. I used to have a job. I used to have my own business, real estate in New York City. Beautiful real estate company. And then I was like, you know what? Maybe I should get back to trying to save the world. It took me a couple of years to brainstorm some ideas. This is the best idea I have so far. I think it's got legs. We'll see how far it goes. This is the time to do it. We have an election coming up, 2022. And then we have a presidential election, 2024. So, but no money yet. So give me money if you have it. But I've been broke for a minute for the last 4 years, so I'll figure it out one way or another. I'm also trying to sell these books. Oh, if you wanted to help me try to sell these books, the first ones we're going to sell are about peace, because again, the only way that they can throw us off track from our plan to save the world is by keeping us emotionally stable and fighting each other, not making friends and talking to people like adults that we are in order to actually figure out our problems and figure out who's stealing money from us. Because you can talk about black people, white people, brown people. You could talk about trans, mixed, unnamed, whatever the latest discovery is on what you want to be. But I'm going to get an angry letter for that. It's about the money. The military and the empire, we're just taking $10 trillion a year from our social commons, okay? And then also during the pandemic, during disasters, they're just shoveling money out the door for private corporations, the largest, not the smallest. Well, half of our small businesses failed during the pandemic. The largest companies got the most money. I saw that firsthand when I had my own real estate company. Zillow got bigger. All of our small affiliates went under. They were bought. And I saw the whole real estate market in New York just consolidate under larger and larger companies. So I'm sure this is the same pattern in every industry. Uber became an overnight behemoth, started pushing out small cab drivers. So if that's something, while I've been doing this, I was brainstorming. This grounding symbol, the electric grounding symbol that I put on the symbol, is to devolve authority. So authoritarians are what's ruining society. The elites and the power centers growing and getting stronger and stronger. The beauty of America was supposed to be our federalism, that we had empowered localities to make their own decisions. And then you had a laboratory of democracy where we can let everyone within rational rights decide how they want to do it in their local area. And then we see who does it the best. That's how marijuana is being legalized. The states are doing it. We're watching the states. We're saying, okay, Colorado legalized mushrooms and weed. It doesn't seem to be falling apart. So devolve authority down to as local as you can. And then also keep this conversation going between friends, not adversaries. Oh yeah, if you, almost dropped my board. Ignore the scream. If you want to help me with that, with the publishing company, which is another way I'm trying to capitalize this journey, I have goodbarracks.com, GOODBARICS.com, and Taoteeshazz, TAOTESHAZZ.com. And also I have 10 Bone Press. That's my publishing company. We stopped the real estate in order to start a publishing company founded on Zen Buddhism, because that is what's brought me peace in my life. I also did yoga today. That was good. And I want to say it yesterday because I didn't know if I was going to continue, but I'm on the second day of a 3-day fast. I cheat a little bit. I drink coffee, but other than the cream in my coffee, it's good. The second day is usually when you stop being hungry. But yeah, last night, lack of food and lack of sleep was killing me. But tonight I feel good. I'm going to see if I can do the third day. I always kind of break down on the third day. I've never done a 5-day. 5-day would be nice. But 3-day, that would be my advice to you. I have the Zen Buddhism I try to promote, the yoga, my own peace practices as we go on this. And that's why I'm wearing the sweater every day. As we go on this journey, we want to make sure to keep our peace. That's how they're going to throw us off, by getting rid of our peace. So I try to share the practices I use. When I find myself becoming too emotional, or I'm just not sure what I'm doing, or I want to just strengthen my muscle, my soul. What is it? What is it called? That part of your character which pushes through adversity, resilience. But fast help you with that. And just like when you're doing something that's physically, the lack of food is causing me to forget words now. Physically demanding. You breathe. That's why when you're working out, breathe on the strenuous part. You breathe in on the negative, and then you breathe out. When you emotions. I talked yesterday about my cousin passing, and when I held his hand for the last time, and I was crying, and all of those. We all die. No one makes it out of here alive, right? All of that's hitting you. That every day is a promise. And I was just breathing into those emotions. So that's what you do with the fast too. Whenever you feel the hunger in your stomach, the pain, because it hurts. Your body's telling you, I need food, I'm going to die. You just breathe into those feelings, feel them, and be thankful for them, because pain means you're still alive. And breathe. Every breath is a gift. And that's the best meditation. I do a meditation too. It's just 50 breaths. that slow, just as slow as you can. If you go too slow, it becomes effort. But even that one breath just slowed me down. And the good thing when you practice these, when you practice yoga, when you practice breathing, it kicks in when you need it. There's so many times since I started yoga a couple of years ago where I almost fall and I catch myself. I have a better connection with the ground. If I fall, my hand can go down and just a finger or two touch the ground and I can balance myself. My ankles, my wrists are stronger. So breathing, I noticed I was in a heated discussion and I started deep breathing. Not consciously, just there was stress, there was pain, maybe my gut felt something. And my breaths got deeper, belly breaths. Those deep, nice, calming breaths. So these are practices. I hope that you get something out of these videos, who's ever watching it. I hope it's more people than just the government. Because they watch everything, right? Let's do this. 20 minutes, we're good. We'll see if I feel up to doing the second video. We're only a day or two behind. We're catching up here. The biggest kink in America's supply chain. Not enough truckers. Gene Soroka, the executive director of the Port of Los Angeles, said his port had told the White House in July that about 30% of the port's appointments for truckers went unused every day, largely because of shortages of drivers, the chassis they use to pull the loads, and warehouse workers to unload items from trucks. The legislation includes a 3-year pilot apprenticeship program that would allow commercial truck drivers as young as 18 to drive across state lines. In most states, people under 21 can receive a commercial driver's license, but federal regulations restrict them from driving interstate routes. From oceans to truck to rail, costs are increasing. Derek L. Leathers, the president and chief executive of Werner Enterprises in Omaha, which employs about 9,500 drivers, said its services cost about 15% more than pre-pandemic levels, as driver salaries and equipment costs have climbed. Only 7% of truck drivers are women, and 40% are minorities, according to a 2019 report from the American Trucking Association. The pilot program in the infrastructure bill aims to help recruit more drivers by allowing people as young as 18 to drive interstate routes. At the Willard and the White House, the January 6th panel widens its net. Donald Trump will continue to be president of the United States for the next 4 years. In another room of the five-star hotel, a phalanx of lawyers and political advisors for Mr. Trump, including Rudolph W. Giuliani, his personal lawyer, Bernard B. Kerik, a former New York City police commissioner, and John Eastman, a scholar working feverishly on a legal strategy to prevent Joseph R. Biden Jr. from assuming the presidency, had set up a kind of command post. On Tuesday, the committee announced 10 new subpoenas that seemed to expand the aperture of the inquiry even further, seeking information from top officials in Mr. Trump's White House, including Stephen Miller, his senior advisor, Keith Kellogg, the national security advisor to Vice President Mike Pence, John McEntee, the former president's personal chief, and others. In recent weeks, the committee had hired new investigators, pored over thousands of documents, and hired privately from a stream of voluntary witnesses, from rally planners and former Trump officials to the rioters themselves. The panel had learned details about how Stop the Steal rally organizers used deception to obtain permits from the Capitol Police to hold rallies near the Capitol, how Mr. Trump and White House officials coordinated with organizers of the rally, whose attendees would later storm the Capitol, and how deeply Mr. Trump's chief of staff, Mark Meadows, was involved in pushing false claims of widespread election fraud. Tom Van Flein, the chief of staff to Representative Paul Gosar, Republican of Arizona, who was deeply involved in the Stop the Steal effort, said he had not yet been asked to come in for an interview, despite being named in the documents requested from the committee. None of the members could have anticipated what occurred later. At the center of the investigation is Mr. Trump himself, who has sued in federal court to block the release of documents related to January 6th and directed his associates to refuse to cooperate with the committee, citing executive privilege. GE breaks up with its storied past. H. Lawrence Culp, the chief executive, brought in to revive the company 3 years ago, called it a defining moment. GE got caught in the past, and now it's the end. It's over, said Scott Davis, chief executive of Melius Research, an independent financial analyst from GE's history. An independent financial analyst firm. GE's history goes back 129 years to when Thomas Edison's Edison Electric Company merged with another business in a deal backed by J. Pierpont Morgan, the financier who helped birth many of America's great companies. In the company's heyday during the last decade of the 20th century, GE invested billions of dollars in profits in new businesses, and that expansion made its brand inescapable. Fortune magazine named Mr. Welch the manager of the century, and in 2000, the Financial Times named GE the world's most respected company for the third straight year. Few outside of Wall Street are still paying a price like GE. As the company scrambled to shed many of its troubled financial assets, its overextended power generation business became a drag on the operation. Mr. Flannery's cuts in that division and other moves across GE were not enough to turn around a huge company with disparate businesses. In France, the climate summit forgot. People are being pushed to the limit. 3 years ago, Montargis became a center of the Yellow Vest social uprising, an angry protest movement over an increase in gasoline taxes that was sustained, sometimes violently, for more than a year by a much broader sense of alienation felt by those in the outlying areas that France calls its periphery. The uprising was rooted in a... Oh, that's not someone talking. Was it? Maybe that's someone talking. No, it's not. The uprising was rooted in a class divide that exposed the resentment of many working class people whose livelihoods are threatened by the clean energy transition, against the metropolitan elites, especially in Paris, who can afford electric cars and can bicycle to work, unlike those in the countryside. There are plenty of people in the periphery who understand the need to transition to clean energy and are already trying to do their part. Electric cars seem fanciful, expensive to people encouraged not so long ago to buy fuel-efficient diesel automobiles, as Energy Check, worth $115, will be sent next month to some 6 million people judged most in need. Local people are not consulted, and even mayors are powerless to stop these ugly turbines. A friend, Philippe Jacob, a professor of management and marketing, also involved in the movement against the turbines, said the Yellow Vest movement had stemmed from rising gasoline prices, falling purchasing power, deteriorating public services, and widespread dissatisfaction with the top-down decision-making. The people have invested their life savings here, and nobody listens when they say plant turbines and biogas plants will mean the region is ruined. I'll work. I'm working on my French accent. I think of GSP, George St. Pierre. Pakistan reaches ceasefire with resurgent Taliban militants. A ceasefire between Pakistan and the Pakistani Taliban went into effect Tuesday, weeks after Prime Minister Imran Khan announced that his government was in talks with some militant groups that were willing to lay down arms in return for amnesty. The Pakistani authorities say that the month-long agreements could extend if negotiations with the Pakistani Taliban, a banned militant group responsible for some of the country's worst terrorist attacks, made further progress. Pakistani officials have not publicly shared details about those negotiations, but in the past, the Pakistani Taliban have made the release of prisoners a precondition. While Pakistan's military has been fighting the Pakistani Taliban, it has long been accused of nurturing the Afghan Taliban. While the Pakistani military made substantial gains in successive military offenses against the group and other militants, some Pakistani Taliban commanders were able to find refuge in neighboring Afghanistan, officials said. Since 2007, the Pakistani Taliban have been responsible for a series of devastating terrorist attacks, among them an attack on a school in Peshawar that killed 145 people in 2014, and a 2009 attack on the headquarters of the Pakistani military. When the Taliban are in your bedroom, it's where armored cars were abandoned as Westerners scurried onto helicopters so they could be ferried out of the country as the Taliban enter the city. The Taliban now do what they please in the Green Zone. At Resolute Support Headquarters, American officials authorized airstrikes that killed Taliban and civilians alike. Why wouldn't the Taliban search every corner, look under every desk? To them, it's almost like the Green Zone is the Dragon King under the mountain, something that could turn the war back on if they somehow woke it up. On the wall is a map of the city of Kunduz and where the Taliban front lines once were, with the insurgents held in check for a brief few weeks by the demoralized and depleted Afghan security forces before they evaporated and the city fell. Now in Kabul, the Taliban are driving around in the Afghan military's trucks and Humvees and armored personnel carriers and wearing their uniforms. West accuses Belarus of orchestrating migrant crises at Polish border. Poland has massed thousands of troops on its border with Belarus to keep out Middle Eastern migrants who have set up camp there, as Western officials accuse Belarus leader of intentionally trying to create a new migrant crisis in Europe. EU leaders are scrambling to strike a balance between protecting the bloc's external borders and preventing a worsening humanitarian crisis among the migrants camped along the edge of a forest in freezing weather. These are just aggressive actions, and we have to resist. Poland has prevented journalists, aid organizations, and EU officials from traveling to the border area, making reports from the scene difficult to verify. Human rights groups, including Amnesty International and the Helsinki Foundation of Human Rights, have accused Poland of illegally pushing migrants who have crossed the border back into Belarusian territory. The situation is complicated by a significant number of pregnant women and infants among the refugees. EU officials said they were analyzing air traffic to Minsk, the Belarusian capital, as potential evidence that Mr. Lushenko was effectively orchestrating a flow of migrants toward EU countries. Polish officials said that, in addition to those at the border, more than 10,000 migrants were elsewhere in Belarus, also hoping to get to the EU. On Monday, Piotr Mueller, a Polish government spokesman, said that the country's border was under attack in an organized manner. A top security official, Maciej Łasek, said a real battle had taken place against people trying to enter Poland illegally near Kuznica. Ethiopia seizes dozens of UN workers as civil war spreads and famine looms. The Ethiopian authorities have detained 16 United Nations staff members and dozens of drivers who were supposed to ferry food aid into a rebel-held Tigrayan region, the UN said, injecting new tension into the organization's troubled relations with a government embroiled in civil war and facing a growing threat of famine. The 16 UN staff members were seized in recent days in the capital, Addis Ababa, the chief UN spokesman, Stefan Dujarric, said on Tuesday. The UN in Ethiopia said on Wednesday that the authorities had detained about 70 drivers who had been hired to transport relief aid into the Tigray region. The drivers, who had been hired by UN agencies and aid groups and the aid group Catholic Relief Services, have been held since November 3rd in Samara, the capital of the Afar region, which borders Tigray. Mr. Dujarric reported the detentions a day after the top UN humanitarian relief official, Martin Griffiths, completed a 4-day visit to Ethiopia, including to the capital of the Tigray region, Mekelle. In a statement issued at the conclusion of his trip, Mr. Griffiths said he had constructive discussions with Mr. Abiy, and I have to hear how they say that name. Abiy? We'll go with Abiy. With Mr. Abiy and his deputy prime minister and foreign minister, Demeke Mekonnen, of the challenges aid organizations face in getting assistance to all Ethiopian in need. News of the detention also came a day after UN Secretary Council met to discuss the conflict, with all 15 members exhorting the antagonists to resolve their issues through political negotiations. I still have to review each week. We're on the third week. We're not that far behind. The world needs to quit oil and gas. Africa has an idea. Rich countries first. Not only would that be particularly costly in poor nations, many African countries have an abundance of fossil fuels, including natural gas, and they argue forcefully that the rest of the world doesn't have a right to tell Africa not to use those resources. At least one gas project in Mozambique, a gas-rich country in southern Africa, will not be going ahead, according to the Africa Energy Chamber, an advisory firm. Efforts to restrict fossil fuel investments in Africa are even harder to stomach because many of the wealthy countries behind them, including Japan, the United Kingdom, and the United States, include natural gas in their own multi-decade plans to transition to clean energy. Yemi Osinbajo, Nigeria's vice president, wrote in Foreign Affairs in the run-up to the talks, known as COP26. The problems in electrification are wide-ranging and vary from country to country. Absence of power-generating capacity, absence of technical expertise, and widespread corruption. In Glasgow, Britain and other rich countries have pledged to fund Africa with billions of dollars to increase warning systems, protect vulnerable communities in the Sahel, and for coal-reliant South Africa to help speed the transition to clean energy. The same countries promised $100 billion annually in 2009 to developing countries, but those funds have been slow to come. America's back, Pelosi says, at Glasgow climate talks. Speaker Nancy Pelosi and nearly 24 House Democrats brainstormed global climate talks here on Tuesday, claiming that America's back in the effort to slow global warming, even as their party remains divided over a $1.85 trillion budget bill, upon which their climate agenda depends. We have to draw down emissions in order to get credit for being committed on climate change. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez, a co-sponsor of the Green New Deal, was surrounded by security as she walked the cavernous tented hallways of the summit, quickly drawing the attention of a crowd of activists who wore masks declaring themselves climate feminists. Representative Sean Casten, Democrat of Illinois, said Congress had been making excuses for inaction on climate change ever since the Clinton administration accepted the world's first global climate treaty, the 1997 Kyoto Protocol, only to see the Senate fail to ratify it. The Republicans said they may disagree with Mr. Biden's policies, but were concerned about climate change, even if they did not support a move away from fossil fuels, which scientists say is needed to avert climate catastrophe. The presence of Republicans was a shift from 12 years ago when Senator James Inhofe, a Republican of Oklahoma, traveled solo to a UN climate conference in Copenhagen to object to climate science and declare, "There's not a chance in the world America will pass legislation to tackle global warming." Senator Brian Schatz, Democrat of Hawaii, said at the summit that he had been encouraged by the number of Republican lawmakers who are willing to discuss serious climate policy. It's a threat multiplier that amplifies and accelerates existing inequities. 80% of people displaced by climate change globally are women. Outside the climate summit, the streets of Glasgow have been filled with protesters, many of them young women. Yeah, you know who else is affected? You know what else affects young women? War. The modern warfare, predominantly affects women and children. We've known this for a while. That was actually Howard Zinn brought that up. 15-minute grocery delivery has come to NYC. Not everyone is happy. The explosion of internet commerce has transformed New York City, with same-day delivery of a couch, a television, or the latest laptop just a few clicks away, as more companies compete for faster delivery. The ultra-fast grocers operate from a network of micro-hubs that are close to customers and often limit deliveries to 1.5 miles or less. Several companies with investors funding their operations for now say they are able to offer free or low-cost deliveries and avoid marking up prices by keeping their overhead low. Mr. Shishkov said he saw the growing network of dark stores as the water pipes for the modern delivery infrastructure system. In the unlikely event that it was successful, it would eliminate the primary location in each community that is a gathering spot. Ultra-fast grocery services also encourage people to place smaller and more frequent orders, resulting in more delivery trips and bringing more trucks to residential areas to restock hubs, all of which worsen congestion and pollution, said Jose Holgun Verez, a professor at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, who studies transportation issues, including bike, Joker, and gorillas. Make deliveries only on foot and by electric bike or scooters, and hire delivery workers as hourly employees starting at or above $15 minimum wage, plus tips and incentives, instead of using gig workers. Missing girl is rescued after using hand signal from TikTok. One person in a nearby car recognized the signal from TikTok and knew it was no ordinary wave. The girl, 16, was using a new distress signal, tucking her thumb into her palm before closing her fingers over it, according to the Laurel County Sheriff's Office. The signal, created by the Canadian Women's Foundation for people to indicate they are at risk of abuse and need help, has spread largely through TikTok in the past year. The person who spotted the signal called 911 and conveyed a suspicion that the girl was in trouble because she used the hand gesture. Though the dispatcher and officers were unfamiliar with the signal, sheriff's deputies pulled the car over to investigate and learned that the girl's parents had reported her missing 2 days earlier. The Canadian Women's Foundation advises that anyone who sees the signal should not necessarily immediately call the authorities, but should instead reach out safely, if possible, to the person who used it. So what, you go like this? Interesting. Trump officials illegally campaigned while in office. Watchdog finds. 13 of President Donald J. Trump's most senior aides, including his son-in-law and chief executive, campaigned illegally for Mr. Trump's re-election in violation of a law designed to prevent federal employees from abusing the power of their office on behalf of candidates, a government watchdog agency said Tuesday. Senior Trump administration officials chose to use their official authority not for legitimate functions of the government, but to promote the re-election of President Trump in violation of the law, the report concluded. Investigators in Mr. Kerner's office said Trump administration officials purposely violated the law prohibiting political activity during the final few weeks of the administration, when they knew that the Office of the Special Counsel would not have time to investigate and issue findings before Election Day. The people accused of breaking the law are a who's who of Trump officials: Secretary of Energy Dan Brouillette, Kellyanne Conway, Counselor, Elisa Farah, White House Communications Director, David Friedman, Ambassador to Israel, Jared Kushner, Senior Advisor, Kayleigh McEnany, Press Secretary, Mark Meadows, Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller, Senior Advisor, Brian Morgenstern, Deputy Press Secretary, Robert C. O'Brien, National Security Advisor, Mark Short, Chief of Staff to the Vice President, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and Acting Secretary of Homeland Security Chad Wolf. The rest of the officials broke the law by overtly campaigning during official interviews or media appearances. The administration's attitude toward Hatch Act compliance was succinctly captured by then Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, who said during an interview that nobody outside of the Beltway really cares about Trump administration officials violating the Hatch Act. The report said in its executive summary, senior Trump administration officials showed an open contempt for the law meant to protect the American people from the use of taxpayer resources and government power for partisan politics. Mr. Bookbinder called on Congress to toughen its laws prohibiting political activity by federal employees. Supreme Court weighs condemned man's wish for pastor's touch. Chief Justice John G. Roberts, Jr. asked about requests to have more than one spiritual advisor in the execution chamber and about last-minute conversions to new faiths. Justice Brett M. Kavanaugh asked about a request for bread and wine in the execution room. Justice Alito worried that judges would be required to go through the whole human anatomy to decide where touching was permitted. Justice Elena Kagan asked Judge E. Stone II, Texas Solicitor General, if he was aware of any other state in any other states of an execution going astray because of an outside spiritual advisor. Mr. Stone said no. A few weeks later, the court confronted a similar case from Texas and came to a different conclusion, staying the execution of a Buddhist inmate whose request that his spiritual advisor be present in the execution chamber had been denied. In a concurring opinion, Justice Kavanaugh wrote that states could exclude advisors of all denomination from the execution chamber, but may not allow only some to be present. Alabama had not carried its burden of showing that the exclusion of a clergy member from the execution chamber is necessary to ensure prison security. Justice Kagan wrote for 4 justices in a concurring opinion. Supreme Court looks at Puerto Rico's status in case on benefits. The immediate question for the Supreme Court justices at an argument on Tuesday was whether Congress was free to exclude residents of Puerto Rico from a Social Security program that provides monthly cash payments to older, blind, and disabled people who cannot support themselves. The benefits, called Supplemental Security Income, are available to U.S. citizens in the 50 states, the District of Columbia, and the Northern Mariana Islands, but not in Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, and Guam. Justice Sonia Sotomayor, whose parents were from Puerto Rico, said that was fundamentally unfair. Their needy people are being treated differently than the needy people in the 50 states. The case, United States versus Valle Madero, number 20-303, concerned Jose Luis Valle Madero, a disabled man who received the benefits when he lived in New York and continued to get them after he moved to Puerto Rico in 2013. Curtis E. Gannon, a lawyer for the federal government, said that Congress had made a rational choice in excluding Puerto Rico, giving its residents general exemption from paying federal income tax. Herman Ferre, a lawyer for Mr. Valle Madero, said that there should be a uniform standard for government benefits and noted that Puerto Rico's residents lack political power. Yeah, it's kind of... Puerto Rico is suffering from taxation without representation, right? We don't really talk about that, do we? 6 automakers and 30 countries say they'll phase out gasoline car sales. Electric vehicles continue to set new global sales records each year, and major car companies have recently begun investing tens of billions of dollars to retool their factories and churn out new battery-powered cars and light trucks. The agreement states that automakers will work toward reaching 100% zero-emission new cars and van sales in leading markets by 2035 or earlier, supported by a business strategy that is in line with achieving this ambition, as we help build customer demand. Zero-emission vehicles could include either plug-in electric vehicles or hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, although the latter have struggled to gain market share. 24 vehicle fleet operators, including Uber and LeasePlan, also joined the coalition, vowing to operate only zero-emission vehicles by 2030 or earlier where markets allow. Worldwide transportation accounts for 1/5 of human carbon dioxide emissions. They are responsible for climate change, with a little less than half of that coming from passenger vehicles such as cars and vans. In recent years, spurred by concerns about global warming and air pollution, governments around the world, including China, the United States, and the European Union, have begun heavily subsidizing electric vehicles and imposing more stringent emission standards on new gasoline and diesel fuel cars. The cost of lithium-ion batteries has also declined roughly 80% since 2013, according to Bloomberg NEF, an energy research group, making electric vehicles increasingly competitive with traditional combustion engine vehicles, though many consumers remain wary of the new technology because of concerns like the availability of charging stations. The Japanese automaker has been more cautious on electric vehicle technology, continuing to bet on alternatives like hydrogen-powered fuel cell vehicles. Free Joe Biden! Sean Malone on how Democrats can get back on track. Mr. Biden's approval numbers are lower than President Barack Obama's were at the same point in his first term, ahead of the 2010 midterms when Democrats lost more than 60 House seats. Mr. Maloney maintained that the ground was already shifting in Democrats' favor after the House's Friday passage of the $1 trillion infrastructure bill, which is headed for the president's desk. You've been advising House members in vulnerable seats to run against Trump toxicity without Trump on the ballot. Didn't we just see why that won't be a winning playbook for Democrats in the midterms? Let's unpack that. Democrats took a majority in the House in 2018 and the White House in 2020 because of suburban voters. Representative Abigail Spanberger of Virginia, one of the most endangered Democrats next year, told the Times last week that Biden was elected to put an end to Trump's chaos, not to enact sweeping policy changes. In deep blue Minneapolis, voters defeated a measure to replace the police department with a public safety department in a year of rising crime. And in deep blue Seattle, a Republican won the city attorney race against a Democrat who called herself a police abolitionist. Split 7 ways immigrant neighborhood seeks to unify its political power. 7 state assembly districts slice through the few square miles around Mr. Nabi's Faith Assembly Church, dividing blocks, congregations, even families. For any community to really come to its rightful place in America, you need folks from that community that rise up, take on a leadership position, and have a viable way to elected office, said John Albert. Hey, that's kind of what I'm saying, isn't it? John Albert? Yeah, we're kind of on the same thing. Oh, except it's faith-based, right? Yeah, no. Yeah, it's separation of church and state. We can't. A well-connected lobbyist and founder of Taking Our Seat, a group that has helped organize a campaign to unite the area's fractured legislative districts. If you are in the community that is not the focus, maybe it feels like it. I was not paid attention to, and now I'm going to make my own voice known. Every 10 years, each state in the U.S. is required to redraw the boundaries of their congressional and state legislative districts in a process known as redistricting. Incumbents can pad the districts by slicing off as filler smaller parts of immigrant communities, which redistricting experts said are less likely to vote in primaries. Take brick and mortar district offices, the linchpins of government services and administration that provide a point of contact for their constituents. Take feedback to Albany and act as a clearinghouse for state benefit and relief programs. Mr. Wiepren acknowledged that his district made little sense geographically, with a major highway cutting Richmond Hill off from the heart of the district. See, so we're going to address this, and we're going to deal with state assemblies as well as federal, the congressional and Senate races. I guess in a way I'm faith-based because I talk about Zen Buddhism a lot. But I think the internet, how we organize on the internet, is going to be our game-changing way. That's how Occupy Wall Street spread, and I was at the heart of that movement. So we're going to take those lessons, and this is just going to be Occupy 2.0. That was a worldwide movement. We'll see how big this movement gets, right? We will see. Cautiously optimistic. Sununu to run again for New Hampshire governor, rejecting Senate bid. Governor Chris Sununu of New Hampshire, a Republican, surprised his party on Tuesday by announcing he would not run for U.S. Senate next year, rejecting a full court press from national Republicans who tried to recruit him to compete for a Democrat-held seat that the GOP believed could determine control of the Senate. At a Republican gathering in Las Vegas over the weekend, where Mr. Sununu spoke, Senator Ted Cruz of Texas urged attendees to lean on Mr. Sununu. A longtime Republican consultant in New Hampshire, David Carney, said the decision by Mr. Sununu, a scion to the state's leading Republican family, was hardly a surprise to those who know him. Mr. Sununu, 47, is a younger brother of a former U.S. Senator, John E. Sununu, and a son of John H. Sununu, a former governor and top White House aide to President George H.W. Bush. I talked earlier about elites and dynastic. Actually, this was this video, dynastic families, and this guy is definitely bred into the political game. Recent polls of New Hampshire showed that in a hypothetical matchup, Mr. Sununu's lead over Ms. Hazan was diminishing. Mr. Sununu's popularity soared last year over his handling of the COVID-19 pandemic, but it had been falling recently to 56% in October from 64% in August, according to the New Hampshire Institute of Politics at St. Anselm College. Oklahoma Supreme Court throws out $465 million opioid ruling against J&J. Oklahoma's highest court on Tuesday threw out a 2019 ruling that required Johnson & Johnson to pay the state's $465 million for its role in the opioid epidemic. The Oklahoma Supreme Court, 5-1, rejected the state's argument that the company violated public nuisance laws by aggressively overstating the benefits of its prescription opioid painkillers and downplaying the dangers. The Oklahoma judge's decision underscored the reading of the state's law. The Oklahoma Attorney General's office had contended that health is a public right that Johnson & Johnson violated under the state's public nuisance law. The judges found fault with the state's case, saying it failed to identify a public right under the nuisance law and had instead attempted to apply a novel theory to what was more likely a products liability case. Regulation of prescription opioids belongs to federal and state legislatures and their agencies, the Oklahoma judges wrote. SpaceX carries NASA astronaut mission home with safe water landing. The space travelers were part of a mission called Crew 2. Shane Kimbrough and Megan MacArthur of NASA, Akihiko Hoshide of JAXA, Japan Space Agency, and Thomas Pesquet of the European Space Agency. Days later, U.S. Space Command, which tracks objects in orbit, determined that the alert was the result of a reporting error and that there was never a collision threat because there were no object at risk of colliding with the capsule. Still, the incident renewed discussion about the growing threat of space debris and other clutter in low Earth orbit. Dr. MacArthur, who combined the chilies with fajita beef, rehydrated tomatoes, and artichokes, called them the best space tacos yet. The astronauts worked on hundreds of other scientific investigations during their 6-month stay aboard the orbital laboratory, from ultrasonic tweezers, which use sound to move small objects, to exploring real-time protein crystal growth under a microscope as a part of a study into new drugs that can treat diseases. The Crew 2 astronauts also witnessed the making of a feature-length movie backed by Russia's space agency, Roscosmos. A Russian actress and a director launched to the space station on October 5th for a 12-day shoot aboard the station for the movie, The Challenge. The film is about a mission to rescue an ailing astronaut who is played by Oleg Nivitsky, an actual Russian astronaut on the station. The last time the space station held just 3 astronauts was April 2020. NASA moves moon landing deadline back to 2025. NASA is pushing back its deadline for returning American astronauts to the moon's surface by as much as 1 year, officials announced on Tuesday. In April, NASA picked Elon Musk's space company, SpaceX, to build a moon lander. The obstacles to meeting the 2024 goal have been political and technical, from ambivalence among lawmakers in Congress to engineering challenges and delays with other system and spacecraft that NASA may also need to get astronauts to the moon. The agency emerged victorious from a bitter and protracted legal fight with Jeff Bezos' space company, Blue Origin, which had lodged 2 protests against NASA's decision to pick SpaceX. The dispute paralyzed the moon lander program for nearly 6 months, precluding NASA from working with SpaceX on Starship development. In February, the Space Launch System is scheduled to carry out its first uncrewed launch of a space capsule called Orion that is meant to transport astronauts to the vicinity of the moon, but not land. NASA plans to pick additional companies to build lunar landers for routine missions to the moon's surface after SpaceX's first 2 Starship flights. Travis Scott's ties to Houston could complicate investigation of fatal concert. Houston police officers have been providing security both on the clock, and moonlighting as employees of the event organizers, according to city officials. Among the questions that touched on the role of the local police were the decisions of whether, when, and how to cut off the performance by Mr. Scott, who continued the show for roughly 40 minutes after the city had declared a mass casualty event at the concert. The crime would have been gross negligence rising to the level of criminal misconduct, and that is an extremely high bar, said Stephen Adelman, a lawyer and vice president at Event Safety Alliance, a trade association focused on safety at live events. Tony Busby, a lawyer representing the family of one victim, Axel Acosta, said he would be establishing a timeline to show that the organizers and security at the festival had lost control almost from the moment the event's gates opened on Friday. How many entities can properly investigate themselves? Disorder at the event had been foreseen by organizers and by the city after stampeding during a 2019 Astroworld event left at least 3 people injured. Still, many in the city viewed the event and Mr. Scott, born Jacques B. Webster, in a positive light. At 83, Nimblewil Nomad enters the Appalachian Trail record book. Nimblewil Nomad is 83 years old, and he enters the Appalachian Trail record book. On Deposit Street, Mr. Eberhart was greeted by Tom Lavardi, known by insiders as the Trail Angel, who for decades has supported hikers. There, a celebratory handover took place, where Dale Sanders, 86, known by his trail name, Graybeard, handed Mr. Eberhard an engraved hiking stick in a symbolic transfer of the record, and then toasted him with champagne. Mr. Sanders has held the title since 2017, when he hiked the entire trail at age 82, and had driven from Tennessee to walk the final miles with Mr. Eberhard. About 3 million people hike the trail either for a few miles or in multi-day segments, or persist along its entire length. People who hike the Appalachian Trail have become a close-knit community, online and on foot, referring to each other by their trail names and exchanging tips, warnings, and other information. After adding hundreds of miles to his hike by starting in Alabama, Mr. Eberhart said he put his pack on and set off on the Appalachian Trail itself on March 1st. We're going to take a break real quick and find out how long the Appalachian Trail is. That sounds interesting. Appalachian Trail. That'd be a cool bucket list thing to do, right? Hike the Appalachian Trail. Length. Here we go. 2,190 miles. What? Almost 2,200 miles. How long does it take? 5 to 7 months. You only get a couple of those on your bucket list. 5 to 7 months of walking. That's interesting. Why Wokeness Will Fail by Bret Stephens. There are protest movements that, even in ferocious dissent, believe that the American system is ultimately geared to fulfill its inner promises of equality, unalienable rights, and the pursuit of happiness, e pluribus unum, a more perfect union. These movements want to tear things down, divide Americans, reject and replace our national foundations. What's wrong with a movement that, on its narrowest terms, aims to make Americans more aware of racial injustices, past and present? Nothing. The problem with the allegation isn't that it's flatly wrong. America's past is shot through with racism. As Faulkner put it, the past is never dead. It's not even past. But the allegation is also incomplete, distorted, ungenerous to former generations that advanced America's promise, and untrue to the country most Americans know today. Wokeness operates as if there had been no civil rights movement and that white Americans hadn't been an integral part of it. In the long run, Americans have always gotten behind protest movements that make the country more open, more decent, less divided. The climate summit has me very energized and very afraid. This is our friend Thomas L. Friedman. Thomas L. Friedman, we are going to speak on you. One day last week, Greta Thunberg, the 18-year-old Swedish climate activist, and hundreds of other youths gathered at Glasgow Park for a snap rally to call out global leaders with the chant, "You can shove your climate crisis up your..." Good news, Gen Zers, you won the debate on climate change. You know you're old when a young person at a climate summit has no idea who Al Gore is. The era of radical climate transparency is about to be born, said Andrew Zolli, Planet's chief impact officer. You can have a scale impact on the climate when you can measure, monitor, manage, and monetize the value of saving a forest or watershed, said Andy Karshner, who was the principal U.S. climate negotiator in Bali in 2007 and whose Elemental Labs is now building more tech tools for market-based solutions for the climate change. Worst idea from climate skeptics. Okay, climate change is real, but it's too late to do anything serious. So let's stop with all the green stuff and focus exclusively on adaptation. What's so bad about golf in Minnesota in February? If there is anything we should have learned from COVID-19, it's that Mother Nature doesn't play nice. The difference will be what we do to minimize climate change now. Didn't we learn that COVID was human engineered? Don't be so quick to doubt China's climate change dedication. Don't be so quick to doubt China's climate change dedication. Disappointing. A shadow on the global climate effort. Even before the Global Climate Summit in Glasgow got underway last week, environmental advocates were quick to point fingers at China's seemingly lackluster new climate pledge as a harbinger of a doomed outcome for the event. Since China is the world's largest emitter of greenhouse gases, some climate watchers had hoped Beijing would make a big splash with its updated targets to fight climate change, like providing an earlier than 2030 peak emissions year or a hard cap on coal consumption. In response, China's top leaders ordered ramped up coal production, but that should not be taken as an indication that they're reneging wholeheartedly on their climate commitments. After decades of criticism for opacity in its climate data and statistics from me and others, the fact that China's leadership is being forthright about its energy shortage and policy response is an important sign of the transparency and progress. While China's motivations are, of course, primarily driven by self-interest, the leadership wants and deserves recognition for its climate efforts so far, like developing clean energy technologies. Data show China is on a path to exceed its 2030 carbon intensity reduction goals confirmed by independent satellite analysis of China's air pollution reductions. Should the Democrats be less progressive? Even more consistently, polls make it clear that large majorities want the people and big businesses that make the most money to pay their fair share of taxes, which would go a long way toward paying for the programs Americans want. Face reality is right. Either coalesce and compromise and do some great things for the American people, or have the GOP take over Congress and re-elect Donald Trump as a president, which will cause us to fail as a country. The advice the editorial page gives to the Democratic Party is to ignore the Times editorial page. The advice the editorial page gives to the Democratic Party is to ignore the Times editorial page. Democrats, notably President Biden, refuse to admit that trying to reason with a party that only offers opposition is futile. It's quaint to think about the days when at least some people in leadership positions actually apologized and took responsibility for their misdeeds. Today, too many people instead try to shift the goalposts, just like Rogers. As China's property crisis spread, Beijing says there's nothing to see. Global markets just weeks ago were fretting over the possible failure of China Evergrande Group, the world's most indebted property developer. The tumult at Evergrande appeared to die down more recently after the company made payments on multi-million-dollar bonds. Mr. Yang said Evergrande had told him and other colleagues that the money the company saved by not paying regular salaries would be used to finish construction on apartments that it had sold but not yet completed. The Chinese authorities have tried to instill confidence and reassure investors by calling Evergrande's risk manageable and pledging to ease China's capital controls on the movement of money in and out of the country, which would help Evergrande and other property developers make payments to foreign creditors. Like HNA, Evergrande has hired restructuring experts, but not much is known about whether the authorities plan to break up the company or who, if anyone, will be saved. Some Evergrande investors were given the opportunity to learn more about the company's vast challenges during a recent meeting, but signed confidentiality agreements ordering them to keep the information secret ahead of a potential restructuring. Meta plans to remove thousands of sensitive ad targeting categories. Meta, the social media company formerly known as Facebook, said on Tuesday that it planned to eliminate advertisers' ability to target people with promotions based on their interactions with content related to health, race, and ethnicity, political affiliation, religion, sexual orientation, and thousands of other topics. The move, which takes effect on January 19th, affects advertisers on Meta's apps such as Facebook, Instagram, and Messenger, and the company's audience network, which places ads in third-party apps. The company has excelled at giving advertisers a place to personalize promotions, with brands often able to aim their ads at Facebook, Instagram, and Messenger users who are interested in topics as specific as LGBTQ culture or Catholicism. Before the January 6th storming of the U.S. Capitol, for example, advertisers used targeting tools to direct promotions for body armor, gun holsters, and rifle enhancements at far-right militia groups on Facebook. Advertisers on Facebook, Instagram, and Messenger advertising on Facebook, Instagram, and Messenger that is finely tooled to people's interest is often more affordable and effective than advertising on broadcast television and other media. Augustine Fau, an independent ad fraud researcher, said advertising on Facebook and its other apps had long worked better than any other display ads elsewhere because Facebook has years of people volunteering information and is pretty accurate. He added that personalized advertising outside the platform often relied on guesswork that was so widely inaccurate that when you try to target based on that, you're worse off than trying to spray and pray. Yet Meta has often struggled with how to take advantage of consumer data without abusing it. Brian Williams says he's leaving NBC News. Brian Williams, the square-jawed news anchor, laid low by a fabulism scandal, who mounted a career comeback with a popular 11 p.m. talk show on MSNBC, announced on he lied. A fabulism scandal. That's the best euphemism for lying I've ever heard. Announced on Tuesday he would step down from the program after a 5-year run and depart NBC News entirely at the end of the year. The exit of Mr. Williams, whose contract is set to expire next month, comes amid a ratings decline in the cable news industry and restlessness among some of MSNBC's star personnel. For Mr. Williams, 62, the departure from NBC News, the division that houses MSNBC, is another twist in a career that scaled the heights of succeeding Tom Brokaw as the anchor for NBC Nightly News, to the lows of a 6-month unpaid suspension in 2015 after he acknowledged exaggerating an anecdote about a helicopter ride in Iraq. His credibility as a journalist tarnished. Mr. Williams returned to television as a breaking news anchor at MSNBC before he and Andrew Lack, then the chairman of NBC News and a close friend, hatched an idea over an Italian dinner for a comeback vehicle. The 11th hour was designed as a late-night show mixing news and conversation about the news, with Mr. Williams as a genial ringleader. Part David Brinkley, part Dick Cavett, part SHAZZBARBARIC. Mr. Williams, who joined NBC News in 1993, has not expressed much interest in returning to a traditional nightly evening newscast, according to the person familiar with his thinking. You could tell I'm getting tired when I start speaking like disjointedly. I'm like, Brian Williams says he's leaving NBC. It's just because I'm tired. Yeah, we'll only do one tonight. We'll catch. That just means I'm doing one on Saturday. It's okay. This weekend, within the weekend, we'll be caught up to the present. Workhorse Group records a big loss on electric vans. Workhorse Group, a small producer of electric vans that has come under investigation by federal authorities, on Tuesday reported a loss of $81 million for the 3 months ending in September, as a result of rising operation costs and a production stoppage related to a recall. The SEC inquiry is related to trading in Workhorse stock before the announcement in February that it had failed to win. The SEC inquiry is related to trading in Workhorse stock before the announcement in February that it had failed to win a large contract from the United States Postal Service, a development that caused a steep drop in Workhorse shares. Of the Justice Department's investigation, Workhorse said only that it was related. We have not received any subpoena or other request for further documents from the DOJ with respect to this investigation. Workhorse's chief executive, Rich Dotch, said on a conference call with financial analysts after the earnings announcement on Tuesday, Mr. Burns, that's what that guy said on Tuesday, yeah. Mr. Burns then left Workhorse and formed Lordstown Motors and planned to use the plant to produce an electric pickup truck. On the conference call, Mr. Dotch said Workhorse was trying to decide whether to continue producing the C-1000 electric van, which it had hoped to sell to shipping companies like Federal Express and UPS. He said the design was not robust, nor is it profitable. Workhorse sold 41 of the vans this year, before it had finished making sure the C-1000 design complied with federal safety standards. Workhorse's stock ended trading at $6.64 on Tuesday, down 3.6%. Hearst magazine journalists protest a mandatory return to the office. More than 300 employees at Hearst magazine divisions have signed a petition objecting to the company's plan to have them return to the office starting next week, and their union has filed a complaint with the National Labor Relations Board. Hearst, whose titles include Cosmopolitan, Esquire, and Good Housekeeping, told staff members in October they would not be required to return to U.S. offices starting November 15th. Eventually, workers will be required to be in the office, the Hearst Tower in Midtown Manhattan, for many 3 days a week. Oh, they'll be required to be back in the office, which is the Hearst Tower in Midtown Manhattan for most of them. 3 days a week, the company said. Some 300, a majority of the approximately 550 in the magazine division, as well as the 450 in its union, sent their petition to a top Hearst executive on Monday. We have seen our colleagues adapt to unprecedented changes in our work lives without a drop in productivity. A Hearst spokeswoman did not immediately reply to a request for comment. On Thursday, the Writers Guild filed an unfair labor practice charge against Hearst with the National Labor Relations Board, says the company. The people don't want to go back to work in offices. That's funny. Twitter expands its subscription service to news articles. Twitter said on Tuesday that it would give users access to ad-free articles from the Washington Post, Reuters, BuzzFeed, and other publications through its subscription service called Twitter Blue. In May, Twitter bought Scroll, a subscription company that created ad-free reading services for publishers. On Tuesday, Twitter said it would ask users to pay $3 a month for those features, as well as access to the ad-free articles. In continuing our commitment to strengthen and support publishers and a free press, a portion of the revenue from Twitter Blue subscription fees goes directly to publishers within our network. Two Twitter project managers, Sarah Breakpour and Smita Gupta, wrote in a blog post, "Our goal is to help each publishing partner make 50% more per person than they would have made from serving ads to that person." Twitter also said it would revive features associated with Newsle, a service offered by Scroll that alerted users about articles that were widely shared by people they followed on Twitter. Twitter Blue is available in the United States, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand, Twitter said. Maybe this idea I have here, reading the Times, maybe this is a startup. Who knows? We need more tools to process reality. I'm trying to provide an objective one. If you could suffer through my reading. If we get the money, I launch my congressional campaign, I get some eyeballs on me. I would love to automate this further. We can write proprietary algorithms to summarize it instead of me using other people's. These are working, but you can tell some of them are me because I get tired. I need to go back to doing this in the morning. Doing this at night, you run out of steam. It's a lot, an hour and a half of talking, and then I have to do two. It's like 3 hours. So yeah, morning I have better energy, but also I'm like a prototype. So if we get software, proprietary software to summarize this news, we have to get it smaller too. I used to summarize it twice as small. When I first did this in 2000, I summarized it in about half the characters. Right now I'm summarizing it about 1 minute to 2 minutes per. I was under a minute before. But I want to do like a closer analysis of the news. So I don't mind speaking more, but it's about twice as long. But yeah, also it should be professional speakers. I'm okay at speaking. People tell me I have a face for you have a face for radio. But no, I'm okay. But yeah, there's people who I could imagine this being programmers constantly working on our algorithms to best summarize the news in the most compact way possible. We always give you access to the original content because if you're interested or something's going on, you always want to open source things and allow people to deep dive if they want. But then also imagine that there's like what did my friend say? She said, this looks like I'm being held hostage somewhere. So imagine this as a real news place. And then now we have the New York Times and then like a bunch of other major papers. And we're putting all that information into brief summaries. And we have like well-dressed, good-looking people who are communications majors. And this is what they do for a living, giving you the news. That would be amazing. And then you have it summarized in written form. You have it summarized by people telling you. And then we have podcasts you could just listen to. I have a couple buddies who are listening to this on their way to work and stuff. Shout out to you. my friends and the government are the only people who are listening to me right now. But if you tell other people, so yeah. But I could see this becoming a succinct way that you can get your information. And that's what it is. Before I make my case, which I have so many opinions about how the world should be, politics, what we have to do to save the world. But before we do that, we're going to provide objective tools for you to make your own decision. Because that's what I like about the intellectual tradition of anarchism. That's what I like about Zen Buddhism. I like anti-authoritarian traditions. I like traditions that don't claim to be the authority. They just want to educate you. David Graeber, rest in peace. He just passed recently, I think. Poor guy. But he was there in Occupy Wall Street with us. He's the one who helped organize our first assemblies. He's a scholarly anarchist. He was an anthropologist and wrote books about anarchism. And he said, so when you read people like this who actually study the theory and promote the theory and advance it, hopefully, if I develop this original political philosophy that I'm working on, maybe I'll be added to the canon of political philosophers. But he, so an idea I got from him was, authority that, it's not that anarchists are against authority. We like authority that devolves itself. We ask for minimum authority. These words in the dictionary are always interesting that have two opposite meanings, because that shows that there's been a political fight over the meaning of those words. Two opposite meanings. What are words in the dictionary that have two opposite meanings? What does that mean? That means that some people in some time in history said it meant one thing, and other people in other time in history said it meant another. I mean, freedom might become one of those words, right? Because George Bush Jr., we should just call him Junior, right? Because he has the character and competency of a child. I remember being in the military, looking at that guy in my chain of command. In your company, you have your platoon sergeants, your company the officers. You have your company officer, the base officer, all the way up the chain of command until the chief of staff, the army, and then you have the president. And it's on the wall. So when you walk in, there is your ancestral canon, your current leadership hierarchy. And you have this goofy ass looking George Bush Jr. right there. And every time I was 18 to 20, I was in the army, I'd walk in and I'd look at that guy, and I did not respect the man. Not then, just out of instinct, and not now after seeing what he did. Anyways, so that's my dig on Junior. He's a horrible human being by every metric of how you would judge a human being. Jeez, those emotions just pushed all the other thoughts out of my head. But sometimes I go too far with my rambling and my train of thought. But what were we just saying right now? We were saying, gather your thoughts, Shaz. You're on the mic. Well, I was describing the news and creating this as tools. And then I was talking about what I like about anarchists and Taoists and others who let you decide by giving you the tools to make your own decision. The Buddhists, they say, the Zen Buddhists say, sit on Buddha's head. Don't worship the past. Learn from it. And then I brought up David Graeber in order to use a quote from him. It's just, I inspire myself by my meandering thought, and then I just keep going after the next thought instead of wrapping up the last one. It's okay. It's probably a habit of smoking weed, but it makes you more intellectually ambitious, if not intellectually rigorous. But David Graeber has a quote that goes, well, it's not a quote, but the example. I'll finally give the example that I keep talking around. He says he likes authorities that devolve themselves. So the doctor is one. A teacher is another one. That's the point of what I was trying to say. A teacher teaches you until you have their knowledge, and then they're no longer necessary. A doctor heals you or works on you until you're healed, and then he's no longer necessary. So anarchists, the intellectually honest ones, though, and that's why during this movement, when I was coming up with the rules, and I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible, is be kind, make friends, respect science. Respect science is in there because this is all scientific. So it just means that you have an open, transparent process which abides by the scientific method. And so anarchists, a friend of mine criticized me for talking about theory and reading and expanding upon anarchist theory. But in history, they have a very important place in history because they were right. So scientifically, these people are people that we should read, because when they looked at objective reality, remember, we're trying to ground this discussion in objective reality. their theory held up. More so, I would say, than anyone else. Anarchism predates socialism. It predates communism. The anarchists took a step back, looked at the authority being created in the world under the nation-state system and said, fuck that. Because they recognized that power was being concentrated and they just wanted the decrease as much as possible. Now, I pointed out that in the dictionary, you'll have words with two opposite meanings and then that's how I got to George Bush, because I said freedom could have two opposite meanings based off of how he used it, because he said, let's go into Iraq to promote freedom, when really we lost our freedoms at home and the Iraqis lost their freedoms. We invaded other countries, took away their self-determination, and we've never had a greater police state than the one that he's instigated since 9/11. So he used freedom in the opposite manner by which it's defined. And maybe that's how these words end up with two opposite meanings. And the punchline of my whole long rant here of about 5 minutes is anarchism has two definitions in the dictionary. One is total chaos, which is how it's commonly used. I've seen it used in the New York Times, everywhere I read. I don't think I ever really see anarchism as the other definition. Here, just look in the dictionary, Google it. Anarchism is either total chaos, anarchy, or it's the ideal of a society without a government. So it's an ideal. It's a hope that we can manage ourselves without the nation state. That's all it is. It might not be achievable. Perhaps we need a way to establish our borders, provide for the general welfare. What is it? Oh, I can do this from Schoolhouse Rock's 5th grade. We, the people, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the... Oh, I lost it. Promote the general welfare and ensure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. That's a preamble, right? So maybe the realities of the modern world and complexities of how big we organize ourselves requires a nation state. But that doesn't mean that we can't learn from the anarchist tradition to devolve authority within that nation state down to the lowest rational amount, to bring it more in line with the authority of teachers and with doctors. That's what libertarians might claim that they want, the least authority possible. But modern libertarianism, mostly from what I can hear and from what I can read, is just stay the fuck off my property. Let me do whatever I want to other people and don't bug me. It's a selfishness of a child. So anarchism at its heart has principles of the commons, society in common that we hold. We just want to manage these. The most rational anarchists, from the theory that I've read, we want to manage them with the least amount of authority as possible. But it's not irrationally don't have any authority until you have chaos. And there's a Simpsons episode of this. Well, I mean, they didn't really expand on that theory, but you have like his Bart's running for class president, right? Bart Simpson. Maybe that's where I got the idea to run for president. And the nerdy kid is saying a vote for Bart is a vote for anarchy. And then Bart is putting up a poster saying the same exact thing. A vote for Bart is a vote for anarchy. Now, Bart didn't mean like the high theory of the ideal of a society with the least amount of authority as possible, meaning the most amount of personal freedom. But those are the anti-authoritarians in our society, right? What is counterculture? But the culture that exists in opposition to oppressive authority, whether it's counterculture in music, counterculture, and we love counterculture. Because we at our heart, and that's why one of the rules that I have for this movement is respect nature. The human nature is to be free and self-determined. And I think that's why kids are showing up to schools. That's why we're having so much violence and emotional distress on the social level. Because society is becoming more concentrated, power-wise. It's oppressing the human spirit. And so we're exploding. The human spirit can become a diamond under the pressure. And you get these wonderful characters that turn that pain and that oppression into something beautiful and turn it into the pearl that was the irritating grain of sand. Or they can become combustible, that some of us don't have the emotional maturity or the tools in order. And that's why with this movement, I would like to at the very least give people tools to better process their emotions so they don't explode like this. So those are some good ideas. That actually woke me up a little bit. A little bit of sincere discussion woke me up a little bit. All right. Anyways, we're almost done with this. Another 10 minutes. I got that off of Twitter. Huh. Rolls-Royce plans to build small nuclear power plant in Britain. Rolls-Royce, the British jet engine maker, said on Tuesday that it was forming a business to build a series of smaller, cheaper nuclear reactors as Britain looks for ways to cut carbon emissions and to reduce the cost of nuclear energy. The kind of reactor proposed by Rolls-Royce would cover about 2 soccer fields, or about 1/10 the acreage of a conventional nuclear power station, the company said. These plants would generate less power, about 1/7 the output of a giant nuclear installation being built at Hinkley Point at southwest England. The British government will contribute a grant of £210 million to develop the plants, while Rolls-Royce and its partners, including Excellent Generation, an American nuclear power company, and BNF Resources, a private company, would together invest £195 million over 3 years. The government is looking for sources of clean power to replace Britain's aging nuclear plants, although the Rolls-Royce models are unlikely to come online for at least a decade. Rolls-Royce's work with nuclear power includes designing the reactors aboard Britain's nuclear submarines, work that began in the 1950s. How data is reshaping real estate. The added layers of technology in stores and entertainment venues, crowd tracking cameras, information gleaned from smartphones, tallies of neighborhood foot traffic, and sophisticated demographic data aim to replicate the data measurement and analysis of the online experience without an overarching federal privacy law or even a shared definition of personal data. Retailers must sort through layers of state and municipal rules, such as California's Consumer Privacy Act, said Gary Kibble, a partner at the law firm Davis Gilbert, who specializes in retail privacy. Which provides location intelligence and demographic data for retailers. The growth of data mining has attracted more entrepreneurs who are eager to create more data-informed experience for retail brands. They're becoming experts in more and more places around the country where to grow based on your data as a brand. They're becoming experts in more and more places around the country where to grow based on your data as a brand. The option to open a turnkey location is a big selling point, but Leap also amalgamates shopping patterns, including local e-commerce sales, foot traffic, and neighborhood demographics across all of its locations. Leap is effectively going to own a data set nationally that's truly meaningful to retailers and to real estate owners, said Mr. Hennick of Current Advisors, which has helped Leap find Manhattan locations for retailers. All right, and now we just have, oh my gosh, we have so many. We have 6 articles about COVID. Moderna and U.S. at odds over vaccine patent rights. The vaccine grew out of a 4-year collaboration between Moderna and the NIH, the government's biomedical research agency, a partnership that was widely hailed when the shot was found to be highly effective. A year ago this month, the government called it the NIH Moderna COVID-19 vaccine. The agency said 3 scientists at its vaccine research center, Dr. John R. Mascola, the center's director, Dr. Barney S. Graham, who recently retired, and Dr. Kizzmekia S. Corbett, who is now at Harvard, worked with Moderna scientists to design the genetic sequence that prompts the vaccine to produce an immune response and should be named on the principal patent application. Moderna disagrees. If the 3 agency scientists are named on the patent along with the Moderna employees, the federal government could have more of a say in which companies manufacture the vaccine, which in turn could influence which countries get access. Omitting NIH investors from the principal patent application deprives NIH of a co-ownership interest in that application and the patents that will eventually issue from it. A spokeswoman for Moderna, Colleen Hussey, said the company had all along recognized the substantial role that the NIH has played in developing Moderna's COVID-19 vaccine, but she said the company was legally bound to exclude the agency from the core application because only Moderna's scientists designed the vaccine. Moderna has pledged not to enforce its COVID vaccine patents during the pandemic. Pfizer asks FDA to expand booster eligibility to all adults. The prospect of all 181 million fully vaccinated adults in the nation having access to extra shots is a turnaround from 2 months ago, when an expert advisory committee to the FDA overwhelmingly recommended against Pfizer-BioNTech's request to authorize boosters for all adult recipients of that vaccine. The Biden administration has been eager to offer extra shots widely since August, when President Biden announced that the best way to protect ourselves was for every adult to get a booster. If regulators approve Pfizer's request, President Biden will have made good on his pledge to offer every adult a booster shot, although the choice would be limited to Pfizer's vaccine for many. For now, only those 65 and older and adults who are at a special risk because of medical conditions or where they work or live can get booster injections if they initially got Pfizer-BioNTech or Moderna's vaccine. Some countries in Europe have already authorized booster shots for all adults. Israel is offering them to everyone 12 and up. An Israeli study published in the scientific journal The Lancet in late October compared about 730,000 people who had received a booster dose in August or September with individuals who had received only 2 doses of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine at least 5 months earlier. India eased the COVID-19 disaster. Fears of complacency remain. The government, encouraged by a flawed mathematical model that showed the pandemic had all but ended in India, prioritized vaccines for healthcare workers and older people with conditions that made them more likely to die from COVID-19. The Serum Institute of India, the world's largest vaccine makers, set aside 100 million doses of the AstraZeneca Oxford University vaccine for its home country in January. India's inoculation program hit its stride, making use of the system and know-how that had made vaccine campaigns against polio and other diseases such a success. Elsewhere in India's remote northeast, villagers received vaccine doses by drone. India still has to administer more than 700 million shots to reach its year-end goal, which at current rates looks increasingly unlikely unless India can repeat Mr. Modi's birthday feat a few more times. Administering 1 billion doses is an important milestone. N.K. Akora, the head of India's National Expert Group on Vaccine Administration, wrote in a newspaper op-ed. But the fact is that there's still a long road to effectively control COVID. In Jharkhand, Ms. Khobragade, the healthcare worker, said myths remain rampant among some villagers that the vaccine is deadlier than the coronavirus, makes men impotent, or among Muslim and Christian warriors, converts people to Hinduism. France will require booster shots for those 65 and older. Seeking to regain control over his agenda 5 months before election, President Emmanuel Macron of France on Tuesday announced the tightening of a key anti-coronavirus measure as infections keep rising across France and the rest of Europe. In a nationally televised speech from the Élysée Palace, Mr. Macron also tried to shift the focus away from the pandemic that has upended his presidency by laying out themes expected to underpin his bid for re-election. Mr. Macron urged France not to let their guard down. The pandemic derailed some of the most ambitious reforms of Mr. Macron's presidency, including overhauling France's complex pension system and reining in public spending. You now have Mr. Macron, Christmas in September, Christmas in October, Christmas in November. Xavier Bertrand, a center-right politician, said Monday during a debate of presidential hopefuls from the Republicans Party. Mr. Macron is leading in the polls among voters ahead of the election next April and is expected to make it into the runoff in a 2-round contest. How to think about the COVID recession. Many are turning to previous recessions as a guide to how things will go. One of the most important things to understand is that while the pandemic created a collapse and, for some, even an economic disaster, it really wasn't a recession in the normal sense. The arbiter of these things, the National Bureau of Economic Research, declared that the United States had a 2-month recession in March and April 2020. The causes of recessions vary, but they follow a basic pattern. The hardest hit industries are the cyclically sensitive sectors where demand dries up. Recessions have a much smaller impact on non-cyclical industries like hospitals, nursing care, gas and electric utilities, and the like. Some service sector industries like education see demand rise in recessions. And the last article. The vaccine mandate kicks in at 100 employees. What if you're at 98? The rule sorts employers into big and small, right at triple digits, covering businesses with at least 100 workers. The Labor Department said it chose the 100% person benchmark because it is confident that employers with at least that many workers have the administrative capacity to enforce the mandate. Ms. Stanhope assuaged the woman's concerns, explaining that the rule covers employers with 100 or more workers. Others were pleased to learn that they fell outside the scope of OSHA's rule, anxious about losing workers during the country's labor shortage. Though the experience of Tyson Foods, a large employer with a vaccine mandate, indicates the impact on staffing might be limited. The Biden administration said the vaccine rule was an important step, not just for public health, but for economic recovery. The single worst disruption businesses have faced is workers getting sick with COVID-19, said Kevin Munoz, a spokesman for the White House. Seasonal workers employed directly rather than through a temporary staffing agency count toward the threshold as long as they're employed while the Labor Department's rule is in effect. And that has been Reading the Times. That has been Reading the Times for Wednesday, November 10th, 2021. My name is SHAZZBARBARIC, SB Barrick, Years for the Revolution. Signing off.